The morning started like every other on Turner Farm, the kind of dawn that unrolled slow and golden over the pastures. Mist clung to the hollows and dew jeweled the weeds along the fence line. Henry Turner leaned on the porch rail, the chipped mug of coffee warming his hands, the smell of wet earth and hay drifting up from the lower field. The barn roof caught the first light, its red paint flaking in patches that looked like old scars. He'd meant to fix that roof come spring. But there was always something else. Fences to mend, calves to tend, the stubborn tractor that cuffed more than it ran. He sipped and watched a single crow balance on the fence post, caw once, and take off toward the trees. The rumble started as a low, distant growl, not thunder but something heavier. Henry turned his head, the mug halfway to his lips. A convoy of county trucks wound down the gravel road, tires crunching through puddles left by last night's rain. He squinted, setting the cup on the railing. The lead truck stopped by the old mailbox, Turner Farms 1947, the paint worn to ghost letters, and two people stepped out, hard hats. One of them carried a bright green banner rolled under his arm. Henry felt a prickle in his chest before they even spoke. He walked down to meet them, boots sinking into soft mud. The woman in front was young, maybe 30, all tidy hair and official politeness. "Mr. Turner?" she asked as if she weren't already certain. "Fess, ma'am." His voice came out slow, gravelly from years of tobacco and early mornings. She smiled a small, strained smile. "I'm from the county planning office. We're here to mark the site for the new Pine Hollow Dog Park." Henry blinked once. The words made no sense strung together like that. "Dog Park," he repeated. The man beside her was already unrolling the banner, hammering wooden stakes into the ground. The bright green fabric fluttered open, future site of Pine Hollow Dog Park. The woman glanced down at her clipboard, flipping a page. The rezoning notice went through last month. The council approved the purchase after public vote. "You should have received the compensation notice." He said nothing. The trucks behind them began to hiss and beep as workers unloaded orange cones and tape. The air filled with the harsh smell of diesel. The noise felt like trespass, cutting through the quiet that had wrapped the farm since his father's death. He said, finally, some legal talk, said they were reviewing the land for recreational use. "Just talk. I'm sorry for any confusion." The woman replied, the kind of sorry that cost nothing. "But it's final now. Construction begins next week." Henry looked past her, toward the barn. The morning sun had caught in its broken window, glinting off the glass. He could still see his father in that doorway. Broad shoulders, straw hat, a shovel in one hand. The old man had spent 50 yearning this soil, and 50 before that his own father had fenced it post by post. This place fed 3 generations. Henry murmured. The woman hesitated, following his gaze. "I know it must be hard," she said, softer now, "but the community really needs this space. There's been a lot of support. People with families, pets, it'll bring life back into the area." "Life," Henry echoed. He knelt, picked up a handful of dirt, and let it sift through his fingers. "What do you think this is?" She didn't answer. Behind them, the man had finished staking the banner. It rippled in the morning wind, bright and cheery against the dull field. The workers started walking the perimeter, counting steps, measuring with metal tape. Henry listened to the clang of tools, the scrape of shovels testing the ground, and each sound felt like a nail in the coffin of his past. He took a step closer to the woman. "You ever farmed a day in your life?" "No, sir," she said carefully. "Then you don't know what you're taking. You see an empty field. I see 40 years of back-breaking mornings and nights so quiet you could hear the corn grow." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't meet his eyes. "Mr. Turner." The county followed procedure. "You've been compensated. Replace his land," he cut in, voice rough now. "You can't buy back soil that's got your family buried under it." The man by the truck called out, "Vol set here." The woman nodded and tucked her clipboard against her chest like a shield. "Again, I'm sorry. We'll try to minimize disruption during construction." Henry let out a laugh that wasn't really laughter. "You can't disrupt something that's already dead." They left soon after, trucks rumbling up the road, the banner left behind fluttering like a flag of conquest. When the sound faded, silence returned. But not the peaceful kind. It was the silence that comes after something's been broken. He walked to the barn. The boards creaked under his weight. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of dust and old hay. The tractor sat where it always had, a relic of better seasons. He ran his hand over the steering wheel, tracing the cracked rubber, and thought about the time his father first taught him to drive it, barefoot, 12 years old, laughing when the engine cuffed and died halfway up the hill. That memory felt like another life. By noon, county survey markers dotted the edge of the property like tombstones. Henry stood at the fence, watching them glint in the sunlight. A neighbor's truck slowed as it passed. Old Bill Morgan from down the road gave him a sympathetic wave. Henry didn't wave back. He couldn't. When the bulldozer came that afternoon, a thin dust cloud rose the blade lower, the wildflowers grew. He watched the teeth biting into earth that still held his father's boot prints. The ground shuddered. The woman looked back once before getting into her truck. Henry thought he saw something like guilt in her eyes, but maybe he was imagining it. People from town would be happy about the dog park, he knew. They'd bring their pets, their children, lauder. But it wouldn't be his lauder. By sunset, the pasture was a patchwork of orange flags and churned soil. The light caught the dust in the air, turning it copper and gold, almost beautiful if he didn't know what it meant. He walked up to the old oak near the house, the one his father had planted the year Henry was born. Its bark was rough beneath his palms, solid and alive. He stood there a long time, watching the day bleed out behind the hills. When the last truck left, he went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the envelope the county had sent, the one he'd ignored. Inside was a check with more zeros than he'd seen in his life. He stared at it until the numbers blurred. Then he folded it once, slid it back into the envelope, and dropped it into the wood stove. The flames took it quick, curling the paper, eating the ink. Outside, the banner flapped in the dark, bright green even in the last light. Henry watched from the window, tight, eyes steady. They thought they'd taken everything from him today. But as the fire crackled and the night grew deep, a thought settled heavy and sharp in his mind. They might own the farm now, he realized, but not the land around it. Not yet. And that, he thought, could still be his. The nights came early that winter, wrapping the hills in a cold so deep it seemed to settle into the bones of the farmhouse itself. The wind found every crack in the wood and whistled through the seams, but Henry Turner had long since grown used to the sound. He sat at the kitchen table under the weak light of a single lamp, papers spread before him like the pieces of unsure how to solve. There were maps. Some printed from the county website, others drawn by his own hand. Old deeds, too, brittle and yellowed, the handwriting in fading Turner, Hayes, Mullins, Carter. Families who had once farmed side by side, before one by one they sold off their land to developers or banks. Now those names meant something else. They were boundaries, coordinates, leverage. The county had fenced off his fields, just as they'd promised. Trucks had rolled in by the dozens, and by spring the skeleton of the dog park had begun to rise. Metal posts, gravel paths, benches waiting to be unwrapped from plastic. Henry had watched from the ridge every morning with a thermos of coffee and a heart that no longer hurt but burned. He wasn't one to shout or fight in court, but a man could still think. And he had been thinking hard. He ran his finger along one of the property lines on the map, following the creek that curved around what used to be his east pasture. The land there belonged to the Carter family, or what was left of it. Their grandson had moved to Atlanta years ago, left the old house to rot. He'd probably sell for cheap. Henry reached for his phone. It rang twice before a groggy voice answered. "Hello," Henry said. "This is Henry Turner. Used to be your neighbor out here in Pine Hollow. Poe, hey Mr. Turner. It's been a while." Honey hesitated. "You still own that 40 acres by the creek, far as I know." "Why, I'm thinking about buying." A pause, then a low chuckle. "Boyin, you lost your farm, didn't you?" "Fi, lost one piece," Henry said. "Don't mean I'm done." Tom whistled softly through the line. "Well, if you're serious, I'd let it go. Place is falling apart. You come up with the money. I'll have my lawyer draw it up." Henry thanked him and hung up. His pulse thrummed with a strange, quiet energy. It wasn't joy, not exactly. More like the first spark of something that could be. The next morning, he drove into town and parked in front of the old credit union. Inside, the air smelled like paper and coffee, the same it had since he was a boy following his father to deposit crop checks. The clerk behind the counter, a woman named Sarah, looked up with polite surprise. "Morning, Mr. Turner. Haven't seen you in here for a while." "Been busy," he said. He laid his cap on the counter. "Need to talk about a loan." Her eyebrows rose a fraction. "Or the farm?" "For the land around it." She hesitated, glanced at the manager's office. "You mean the county property? Everything around it?" His tone made it clear there was no mistake. They talked numbers for an hour. The bank manager joined them halfway through, polite but skeptical. Henry knew what they saw: a 62-year-old farmer with calloused hands and a face lined like the fields he once plowed. But he also had assets. The old Turner house, the insurance money from his father's passing, the machinery he'd kept in good shape even when everything else had gone to rust. By the time he walked out, the paperwork was started. He stood on the sidewalk and looked down Main Street. People passed by, laughing, carrying grocery bags, a couple walking their dog. A sign in the hardware store window read, "Coming soon, Pine Hollow Dog Park. Grand opening in June." Henry stared at it until the letters seemed to blur into nothing. Over the next few weeks, he drove from farm to farm. Some of the owners he'd known for decades, others only by name. He made offers that were fair, sometimes generous. He didn't haggle much, he didn't have time for that. Word spread that old Henry Turner was buying land like a man with something to prove. People speculated, maybe with land to start farming again, maybe he wanted to build cabins, maybe he'd lost his mind. Only Henry knew the truth. Each deed he signed, each fence line he reclaimed, tightened the invisible circle he was drawing around what had once been his. At night he returned to his kitchen table, spreading the updated maps across the surface. The circle was almost closed now. Just 2 parcels left. One belonged to the county road department, a small strip of gravel road that served as the only paved access to the park. The other was an overgrown lot once owned by the Mullins family, now abandoned. He smiled faintly to himself. Those would take more finesse. The phone rang one evening as he sat marking new boundaries in pencil. It was Bill Morgan, his neighbor from down the road. "Henry, what's all this talk I'm hearing? You buying up half the valley?" "Not half," Henry said, leaning back in his chair. "Just what's mine to take. You trying to stop that park? It's a done deal, you know." "I ain't stopping it," Henry replied. "Just making sure folks remember where it begins and ends." Bill was quiet for a moment. "You always were a stubborn son of a gun." Henry smiled faintly. "Guess that's what keeps me alive." The conversation drifted to weather and crops before ending politely. But when Henry hung up, his smile faded. He knew some of the neighbors didn't understand. Maybe they thought he was bitter. Maybe he was. But bitterness, he had learned, could be a tool. Sharp, dangerous, but useful in the right hands. By late spring, the contracts were finalized. The title office clerk browsed as Henry signed the last set of papers. "You're now the owner of the Turner Ring," she said with a laugh. "That's what folks are calling it. You've bought everything except the park itself." "Then I've done enough," Henry said. Driving home, he took the long way around the hills, past the new dog park's shiny fences. From a distance, it looked almost pretty. Fresh grass, new benches, a pond glimmering in the sun. He could see families walking the trails, testing them out before the grand opening. A pang tugged at him, not of anger but of something quieter. He didn't hate the people using it. He just hated by they had built it on. He stopped the truck by the old oak at the edge of his property and got out. The air smelled of honeysuckle and cut grass. From where he stood, he could see the park's main entrance. One narrow road that wound through what was now legally his land. He walked to the fence line and rested his hands on the post. The earth here was still soft from spring rains. He knelt, touched the soil, and smiled faintly. It was his again, a way the county could never understand. In the following days he began small. A gate across the road. Private property. Signs along the gravel shoulders. Then a chain. Then another gate. At the trailhead by the creek. Each one was legal, each one registered and recorded with the county clerk. At night, he sat by the window, watching the park lights flicker through the trees. He didn't need to sneak down there anymore. The land spoke for itself now. It was quiet again, the kind of quiet that belonged only to him. Sometimes he wondered what his father would think, whether he'd call it justice or foolishness. Maybe both. But when the wind moved through the grass and the coyotes called from the ridge, Henry felt something like peace. Not forgiveness, not exactly victory, but a stillness deep enough to live with. He folded up the latest deed, slipped it into the drawer beside the others, and turned off the lamp. Tomorrow he'd call the fencing company. There was work to be done. Always work to be done. And the ring wasn't finished yet.